It was a Tuesday morning. I still remember the smell of rain on the porch, the way Linda hummed while frying bacon, the way little Grace's laughter echoed down the hallway like something holy. I was halfway through tying my work boots when the pounding started, 3 loud knocks that didn't sound human. Then glass shattered, doors slammed open. And before I could even understand, my face was in the floorboards, the taste of dust and metal filling my mouth. "Samuel Ward, you're under arrest for murder." Someone yelled, "Murder." The word hit me like a hammer. I kept saying, "You've got the wrong man," but they didn't listen. They twisted my arm so hard I heard a pop. Linda was screaming, clutching Grace, our daughter, only 5 years old, who kept asking, "Daddy, what's happening? Why are they hurting Daddy?" I saw her face once before they dragged me out. Her big brown eyes filled with confusion. Linda wouldn't even look at me. She just whispered something into Grace's ear, and I swear I saw the girl's expression harden, like the world had already told her who I was supposed to be. Outside, neighbors gathered on their porches. Rain was falling now, thin and cold, and someone shouted, "That's him! The man from the news!" I didn't understand. I had been in the garage fixing transmissions all week. But they shoved me into the back of the police car like a dog that had bitten someone. As the door slammed, the world tilted. I saw my reflection in the window, eyes wide, face bleeding. And for a second I thought, maybe I really am dead and this is what hell looks like. When the sirens screamed, I looked back through the glass. Grace's small hand was in Linda's, and she wasn't crying anymore. She was staring, cold, like I was already gone, and in that stare, my life began to end. They locked me in an interrogation room that smelled like bleach and sweat. My wrists burned from the cuffs. The clock on the wall didn't move. I tried to ask for a lawyer, but they laughed. Officer Frank Dugan leaned across the table, his breath sour with coffee and tobacco, and said, "You think anyone's coming to save you, Ward? You killed a man in cold blood. I told him I didn't even know the victim's name." He slammed a folder on the table, photographs of a gas station robbery gone wrong. A dead clerk on the floor, blood like spilled paint. My picture was clipped to the corner. Someone had drawn a red circle around my face. "Witness saw you running," Dugan said. "Your fingerprints were on the counter." I shook my head, whispering, No, that's not possible." But my words hit the walls and came back broken. They kept me there for hours, asking the same questions until time melted. I started to feel dizzy, like maybe I really had done something terrible and forgotten it. When they finally left me alone, I stared at the metal table. My reflection looked like a stranger's, hollow eyes, trembling lips. Somewhere down the hall, I heard another man screaming, begging for mercy. I thought of Linda's voice, calm and sharp like glass. "You always said you'd protect us. Look what you did." By the time they led me to a holding cell, night had fallen. The city lights outside flickered through the bars like ghosts. I wanted to sleep, but all I could see was Grace's face, frozen, watching me disappear. That night I learned something. The worst part of losing your freedom isn't the steel or the cold. It's the silence. It's the sound of no one coming. They gave me one phone call. My hands shook as I dialed home. Linda answered on the second ring. "Linda," I said, my voice cracking. "They made a mistake. I need you to get me a lawyer. Please tell Grace She cut me off. Her voice was sharp, distant. "Don't call here again, Samuel. You brought this on yourself." "Linda, what are you saying?" "You know I didn't—" "She saw you on TV," she said coldly. "They said you killed that man. I can't have you near us. Grace doesn't need to grow up with a murderer for a father. Linda, please, listen to me." But the line went dead. I stood there, the receiver still warm against my ear, listening to the hum of the empty line. It was like hearing my own life dissolve. A guard came by, snatched the phone away and locked me back inside. That night I didn't cry. Not yet. I just sat there, hands pressed to my knees, whispering Grace's name over and over, like maybe the sound alone could reach her through the walls, through the lies, through the years that were already forming between us. Outside, thunder rolled over the city. Inside, I counted the seconds between the flashes. I didn't know it yet, but that was the first night of 38 years. And I didn't know that the woman who had once said she'd die for me had already started burying me alive. Before the bars, before the numbers sewn to my chest, I was a man of simple repetitions. My mornings began with the squeal of the garage door, the tick-tick of cooling engines, the sweet burn of coffee left too long on the hot plate. Marion, Ohio had a way of smelling like two things at once: oil from Reese's Auto and fresh bread from Delaney's bakery across the street. I'd stand out front in a faded denim jacket, letting the wind carry grease and yeast into one strange perfume that felt like a promise. Work today, food tonight, sleep like a stone. Back then, people knew my name because I knew their cars. Mr. Alvarez's old Chevy with the whining alternator, Maya Chen's Corolla that rattled only when she was nervous. I kept a little notebook in my pocket, not for parts or invoices, but for the tiny kindnesses: who'd lost a dog, who had a sick uncle who needed me to say, "Pay me when you can." Money mattered, but not as much as seeing a person drive away safer than they arrived. Linda would swing by around noon, hair tucked under a red scarf, cheeks pink from the wind, and hand me a bag, 2 turkey sandwiches and a note folded small, dinner at 6. Don't be late. I kept every note, tucked in the bottom drawer of my toolbox under the socket wrenches. I thought love was a kind of reliable math. Effort multiplied by time equals a future. At night, we'd fall asleep to the hum of the box fan and the soft, restless sounds of baby Grace in her crib. I'd press my palm against her tiny back and feel the rhythm of breath, so light it scared me. "We're good," I'd whisper to the dark. "We're good." I didn't know how quickly a life that quiet could tilt. I didn't know how one bad story told loudly enough could drown out every honest day I'd ever lived. I didn't know the wind could carry lies farther than the smell of bread. When I first met Linda Price at the Starlight Laundromat, she dropped a basketful of clothes and started laughing at herself. This musical, careless sound that made me feel like we'd stepped inside summer. She said, "You look like a man who knows how to fix a dryer." And I did, and then we were at Dottie's diner sharing cherry pie from the same plate. Linda could make a booth feel like a ballroom, 2 forks like silver wands. She had a way of turning ordinary into spectacle. I thought that was magic. I didn't see the shadows yet, the corners where fear collects. We married in a church with peeling paint and stained glass saints who looked surprised to see us. Pastor Willis pronounced us, and Linda squeezed my fingers so hard it hurt. And I liked that it hurt because it meant real. Grace came a year later with a wail so fierce I laughed. "She's got lungs like her mother," I told Nurse Olivia. And Linda rolled her eyes but smiled the kind of smile you look for in crowds later, hoping to catch it again. Grace's first word was light. She'd point at the lamp, the window, the sunrise creeping under the blinds. Light. I rewired our old living room fixture just so I could flip it on each evening and hear her say it. Linda would kiss the top of Grace's head and say, "Daddy's a fixer. He fixes everything." I believed her. I believed I could keep the roof secure, the job steady, the fridge full, the laughter frequent. But inside Linda there was a different ledger. One I couldn't see. Anxiety tallying every late bill, every unexpected repair, every time I said "we'll manage" and meant it. She loved beautiful certainty. I loved scrappy hope. Those two things look like cousins until they don't. On the night the news first mentioned the gas station robbery, just a crawling line on the TV beneath a sitcom rerun, Linda turned down the volume and said, "Promise me nothing bad will ever touch us." I held her hand and promised. I promised big. I promised like a fool. And somewhere far off, the first crack ran through our quiet house. The day before the sirens, I changed the brake pads on a school bus and felt oddly proud of the soft halt it made at the corner by Maple Park. I bought Grace a lemon ice from Gus's cart, the paper cup cold enough to bite. She pressed it to my cheek and squealed, "Light!" because the sun struck the melting crystals and threw them into glitter. Linda watched us from the bench, sunglasses hiding whatever her eyes were doing. "We should move," she said suddenly. "Somewhere bigger. Somewhere better. After tax season," I told her. "We're close." I pulled out my little notebook and showed her the numbers, the careful columns, the plan that required nothing to go wrong. She nodded, but I could feel the distance, like she'd stepped into a room I didn't have the key for. That evening I tuned the radio to old soul songs, while Grace stacked block towers that leaned like tired skyscrapers. Linda cooked chicken with rosemary, our whole house smelling like a promise kept, and we ate with our elbows touching. After, I went to the garage to sort sockets by size, a habit that calmed me. Order coaxed from chaos, one click at a time. I wiped my hands on a rag that had my name stitched on it. Sam in Linda's early handwriting. Round, hopeful letters. I thought I was a decent man. Not perfect. Not big, but decent. The kind who shows up, keeps his word, says thank you. I believed decency was armor. That if you did right by folks, the world would do right by you. It's funny how we build our lives on superstition and call it character. Night fell gentle. I kissed Grace goodnight. Linda turned off the lamp. The fan hummed. I slept easy for the last time. If I'd known what morning was bringing, I would have held them longer. I would have written a better note and tucked it deeper in the toolbox. I would have memorized the curve of Linda's mouth when she wasn't afraid. I would have told Grace that light is stubborn, that even when someone switches you off, there's a glow that lingers, but I didn't know. I didn't know the story about me would soon be louder than the man inside me. I didn't know that tomorrow my name would stop belonging to me. They said it happened on a Friday night at a Shell station 10 miles from my house. A man named Robert Hensley, a clerk, was shot during a robbery. The cameras were broken. The witness said he saw a tall guy with dark hair in a denim jacket. That was it. That was enough. When they read the charges, I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I thought there had to be a mistake so big it would fix itself. I was at the shop, I told them. Ask Mr. Alvarez, he picked up his Chevy that night. But they didn't. They had fingerprints, mine, on the counter. I kept saying I've never even been there. Later I learned how those prints got there. 2 days before the murder, a man had brought in a car for repair. A beat-up Ford belonging to Officer Dugan's cousin, though I didn't know that then. He'd asked to borrow a rag to clean his hands, and used it to wipe down something he said was evidence from his cousin's place of work. That rag carried my prints. That's all it took. The police found the rag in a dumpster behind the gas station, and suddenly I was the killer. Evidence, they called it. But all I saw was a chain of lies. One greasy rag, one lazy investigation, and one man who didn't fit the story they wanted to tell. They showed me photos. The clerk's body sprawled behind the counter, blood pooled near the soda fridge. I couldn't look, but I forced myself to. Because if I didn't look, it felt like I was agreeing with them. Dugan slammed his hand on the table. You don't look so innocent now, do you? I remember the hum of the fluorescent light above me, how it flickered, how I fixated on that flicker, like it was the last honest thing in the room. When they led me back to my cell, I whispered to the guard, "You ever get punished for something you didn't do?" He said, "All the time." I got married. Then he laughed, but I didn't, because it wasn't funny anymore. The night of the murder, I was at the garage till nearly midnight. Ralph Simmons, a part-time driver, dropped off an alternator. The rain had started again, a long, cold drizzle that made the world feel smaller. I signed his work slip, he left. I locked up, that's what I told them over and over. But Ralph disappeared before trial. They said he'd moved south. I later found out he'd been in rehab, unreachable until it was too late. Without him, I had no alibi that mattered. The next day, the news said the police had their man. I sat on a hard cot, watching a tiny TV through the bars. My picture, my face, was on the screen under the words, "Murder Suspect Captured." My stomach dropped so far I could barely breathe. Linda came that afternoon with Grace. She didn't come close. She stood behind the glass holding Grace's hand. I tried to smile. "You know me," I said. "You know I didn't." But Linda's eyes were different. She said, "They have proof, Sam. They found your fingerprints. Don't make this harder." I reached for the glass. Grace hid behind her mother's leg. I wanted to shout, "They need someone to blame." But I saw something behind Linda's anger. Fear. The kind that makes a person pick a side before they even know the rules. She was scared of the shame, the neighbors, the stares. Scared of being the wife of the murderer. She leaned close to the glass. "If you care about us, don't drag this out." And just like that, the woman who once said she'd fight the world with me handed me over to it instead. When they took her away, I saw Grace look back once. Her small hand lifted, uncertain. Not a wave, more like a question she didn't know how to ask. I wanted to tell her I'd never taken a life, but by then mine was already gone. In the months before trial, the story grew teeth. Reporters parked outside the courthouse. Strangers shouted "murderer" when the van passed. Dugan fed them every lie they needed. Said I was unstable, violent, obsessed with money. Linda never visited again. But I'd see her in the papers sometimes, walking out of the courthouse, Grace clinging to her arm. Her hair was perfect, her eyes red. The headline read, "Wife of Killer Speaks. I just want justice, justice." That word used to mean something clean. Then it became a weapon. My lawyer, a public defender named Alan Burke, told me to plead guilty to manslaughter. You'll serve 15, maybe less. They've got fingerprints, Sam. You can't win. I said no. I said I'd rather rot than confess to a lie. He sighed, packed his briefcase and said, "Then you will." One night I woke up in my cell to someone crying. A young kid, new arrival. He kept saying, "They said I did it," but I didn't. I wanted to tell him it gets easier, but I couldn't, because it doesn't. You just get quieter. That was the night I realized something awful. Once a lie is told about you, it learns to breathe. It doesn't need the truth to die. It just keeps walking, eating, growing. And soon enough it starts wearing your face. I used to believe the truth had its own gravity, that it would pull everything back where it belonged. But that night, staring at the cracks in the concrete ceiling, I understood. The truth can drown just like a man, and I was already sinking. The courthouse smelled like old wood and sweat, the kind of place where time didn't move right. Every sound echoed too long. Footsteps, whispers, the squeak of the prosecutor's chair. I remember the way the bailiff's voice cracked when he said, "All rise," and how I rose like a ghost, my legs trembling under the weight of chains that had already decided what I was. Judge Warren Hale looked down from his bench like a man watching a storm he couldn't stop, or maybe didn't want to. He had a face carved from boredom. To him I wasn't a person, I was a case file. Harold Finch, a young assistant at the time, sat in the back row taking notes for someone else. He didn't know then that 30 years later, he'd be the one to dig me out of my own grave. The prosecutor, Tommy Keene, smiled like a man who enjoyed his job too much. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, turning to the jury, "this is not a case of confusion or coincidence. This is about greed and violence." He pointed at me like a teacher calling on the slowest kid in class. "Samuel Ward killed a man over $67. The jury stared at me, 12 strangers deciding whether I deserved to breathe. I tried to meet their eyes, but they looked past me, like I was already erased. My lawyer sat beside me, flipping through papers, avoiding my gaze. He'd stopped believing in my innocence weeks ago. When they showed the photographs again, the ones of Robert Hensley's body, I could feel the jury recoil. I wanted to shout that I'd never even met the man, but the judge warned me after my first outburst. "One more word out of turn, Mr. Ward, and you'll be removed from the courtroom." So I swallowed every word, every truth. When Linda took the stand, my throat closed. She wore a black dress and didn't look at me. The prosecutor asked her if I'd ever been angry, violent, or jealous. She hesitated just long enough to kill me, then said softly, "He had a temper," and that was it. That was the moment the air left my lungs. Linda's words echoed for days in my head. He had a temper. Not he hit me, not he hurt me, just he had a temper. But that was enough for the jury. Enough for the papers. Enough for the story they wanted. During closing arguments, Prosecutor Keene painted me as a desperate man drowning in debt, humiliated by failure. He said I snapped. He said I killed for pocket change. He said I ran from the scene in my denim jacket. He said I was a coward who left a family behind. I remember gripping the edge of the defense table until my knuckles turned white. I wanted to stand, to scream that I had never run from anything, that I worked, I fixed, I built, I cared. But when your voice has already been turned into noise, no one hears you anymore. When the jury came back after only 3 hours, I knew. The foreman, an old man with kind eyes, didn't look at me. "Guilty," he said. The word didn't even sound human. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The courtroom blurred, voices overlapping, reporters scribbling, cameras clicking, a woman crying in the back row. Linda was gone. She didn't stay to watch the sentence. Judge Hale said, "Life in prison without the possibility of parole." That's when the chains came back, cold and sure. As they pulled me away, I turned to where Linda had been sitting. Grace's tiny red ribbon, the one she wore in her hair the day I was arrested, was on the floor under the bench. I stared at it until they shoved me through the side door. It's strange. You'd think the worst pain would be hearing guilty, But it wasn't. It was realizing no one in that room cared if it was true. That was the day my name stopped meaning Samuel. It started meaning case number 48765, the prison transport van smelled like gasoline and fear. I sat chained between two men, both convicted killers, while the guard smoked in the front seat, windows cracked. One of the men leaned toward me and said, "You look like you don't belong here." I didn't answer. He laughed. "None of us do." As the van rolled down the highway, I stared through the small metal grate, watching the city fade behind us, the skyline shrinking, the world I knew dissolving into fields and fog. Somewhere in that city, Linda was probably telling Grace that Daddy had to go away because he'd done something bad, and Grace would believe her. Because why wouldn't she? Children believe their mothers. When we stopped at Hawthorne State Penitentiary, the air was thick with smoke from the nearby factory. The sound of gates slamming echoed like gunshots. A guard shouted my new number. I repeated it out loud, and with every repetition, I felt myself vanish a little more. That first night, lying on a thin mattress that smelled of bleach and iron, I tried to pray. But the words came out wrong, stuttering, half-choked like a language I'd forgotten. I didn't ask for freedom. I just asked that Grace remember me right. Just remember me once. But somewhere between the clock ticks and the distant shouting, I understood. Linda would rewrite me. She'd tell our daughter a story cleaner than the truth, a story where she was the hero who protected her child from the monster I'd become. And by morning, that story would start spreading. Because in America, once the gavel falls, you don't belong to yourself anymore. You belong to the version of you they can sell. Hawthorne State Penitentiary wasn't a place. It was a wound that never closed. The first thing I noticed was the smell, a mix of rust, disinfectant, and something sour like rain trapped in old clothes. The walls sweated in the summer, froze in the winter, and whispered in between. The guards didn't speak names, only numbers. 48765, move. 48765, face the wall. That number crawled inside me until I started answering to it without thinking. They shaved my head, stripped me down, handed me clothes that still smelled like the last man who wore them. My old life, my name, my home, my family, stayed folded with the denim jacket they threw into a plastic bin marked property of inmate ward. My first cellmate, Ralph Simmons, was a wiry man with eyes that never rested. He'd been inside 15 years for armed robbery. He said, "Rule 1, Sam, don't believe in friends. Believe in favors." He was wrong. He became the only friend I ever had in there. Every morning, the metal doors clanged open at 6. The sound hit you like thunder, a reminder that the world owned you. Breakfast was grey mush and burnt coffee, but hunger doesn't argue. The yard smelled of sweat and cigarettes. Men walked in circles, each one pretending the fence wasn't there. I spent my first weeks trying to stay invisible. But invisibility doesn't work when you're new. Red McAllister, a tall man with scars like a road map across his arms, decided I looked too clean. One afternoon he slammed me against the laundry wall, whispered, "Fresh meat don't last long here." I thought that was the end of me. But Ralph stepped in. He didn't say a word, just stared at Red until he walked away. That night, Ralph handed me half his cigarette and said, "Now you owe me." I paid him with trust. And in a place like that, trust was rarer than freedom. I learned quickly, prison isn't built to punish, it's built to erase. And every day I felt myself fading piece by piece into the grey. There's a certain silence that belongs only to prison, not peace, not quiet, but something heavier. The kind that hums behind every sound. At night you hear it in the pipes, the distant shouts, the scraping of a spoon against concrete. It's the sound of men trying to keep their minds from unraveling. Ralph used to talk to himself, whispering stories about his mother's kitchen, the smell of fried catfish, the radio playing Marvin Gaye. If I stop hearing her voice, he said, then I'm really gone. I started doing the same. I talked to Grace. I told her about the stars she couldn't see from our street anymore, the way fireflies blinked like shy souls. I told her I was sorry. Every night I told her I was sorry. One afternoon, Sister Agnes, the prison chaplain, found me sitting alone in the chapel. She had soft eyes, the kind that didn't flinch. "You believe in God, Samuel?" She asked. "I used to," I said. She smiled. "Then talk to him like you still do. Sometimes that's enough." I tried, but my prayers hit the ceiling and fell back down like dust. Months turned into years. The seasons didn't change inside, only the calendar on the wall did. Letters came for other men, wives, sons, sisters. My name was never called. Once a guard named Carter tossed a pile of mail at me and said, "Maybe she forgot the zip code." Then he laughed. But I knew Linda hadn't forgotten. She wanted me erased. To her, I was a mistake she'd corrected. And Grace, she was growing up somewhere, being told that her father was a killer. The thought ate at me like rust. Because a lie, when repeated long enough, doesn't just live. It breeds. And out there, my daughter was being raised by a ghost that wore my name. On my 5th year inside, I stopped expecting mail. But Ralph never gave up. Every Friday, he'd ask, "You check your name, Sam?" I'd nod, pretending. Then one day, a guard walked by with a small white envelope. My heart jumped. Until I saw him hand it to Ralph. He opened it slow, careful, like something holy. "From my niece," he said, smiling. "She drew me a cat." I tried to smile back, but my throat burned. That night, he slid half the envelope under my bunk. A corner of the drawing, a cat with crooked whiskers. "Now you got mail too," he said. I stared at that paper for hours. It wasn't from Grace, but it was proof that the world still remembered someone in here. It gave me just enough light to last another day. Years later, a new guard, Miller, a young one, told me something that made the air leave my lungs. "Your wife called years ago," he said. "Said to mark you as deceased in the visitor log. Told her kid you died in prison." I couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe, dead to her, to my daughter, to the world. That night I sat on the cold floor staring at the crooked cat drawing and whispered, "If I'm dead to them, then I'm free to haunt them." But I wasn't free. I was still there, flesh and bone and memory. The walls listened. The walls remembered. And in that silence I made a promise: if I ever got out, I'd find Grace, even if she hated me. Even if she believed I was the monster her mother made me out to be. Because ghosts don't stay buried forever. I started writing to Grace during my 2nd year inside. At first, the words came easy. Stories about the world beyond the walls, about the robins nesting in the razor wire, about how I still dreamed of fixing cars again someday. I didn't tell her about the fights, the lockdowns, the nights when men screamed until their throats gave out. I wanted her to think I was somewhere between surviving and waiting, not dying slowly in a room that smelled like bleach and hopelessness. I wrote every Sunday, the only day the air felt softer. The paper came from Sister Agnes, who said, "Words are a kind of key, Samuel. Keep turning it." So I did. Letter after letter. Birthdays, Christmases, her first day of high school. All the years I never got to see. I told her I loved her. Every single time. I ended each letter with, "Your father, always waiting." And every Monday I'd wait by the mailroom window watching the guard shuffle through the names. Ward. It never came. Weeks turned into months, months into years. One day the guard said, "You're still writing those, huh? Kid probably threw them in the trash." I didn't answer. I just kept writing. Because that's what fathers do. They keep talking into the void, hoping the echo sounds like love. Then one afternoon, the chaplain brought me a small cardboard box. My heart stopped. I thought it was finally something from her. But inside were all my own letters, unopened, returned to sender. Dozens of envelopes, edges yellowed, my handwriting fading. On top was one note from the post office, recipient no longer at this address. That night, I pressed those letters against my chest and prayed that at least one had made it through, that maybe she'd seen my name on the envelope, even if Linda told her not to open it. Maybe she'd kept one hidden in a drawer somewhere. Maybe hope is a dangerous thing. But it was the only thing they couldn't lock away. It was Officer Miller again, the young guard who still had light left in his eyes, who told me the truth. It was during inspection rounds late one evening, when the hall smelled like floor wax and rain. He said, "Ward, you ever wonder why you don't get letters?" I laughed bitterly. "Every damn day." He hesitated, then sighed. "I shouldn't tell you this, but I looked you up once. Your wife called the warden's office about 8 years ago. Told them to mark you as deceased in the visitation system. She said your daughter didn't need to be reminded of a dead man." For a second, the world tilted. The air left the room. "Dead?" I whispered. "Yeah," he said softly. "She said you died of pneumonia. Even sent an obituary to the local paper." I couldn't move. Couldn't think. The words sounded like someone else's tragedy. "She killed me," I muttered. He didn't answer. He just looked at me with pity. then walked away. That night I stared at my reflection in the stainless steel mirror. A man with grey in his beard, eyes gone dull, a face hollowed by years. I touched the glass, half expecting it to fog under my breath. Proof that I was still alive. It didn't. The metal stayed cold. Somewhere out there, Grace was growing up believing her father was 6 feet under, believing Linda had buried him with tears that were never real. And for the first time since my arrest, I wanted revenge. Not violence, no, that was too easy. I wanted truth. I wanted the truth to find her the way pain had found me, slowly, inescapably. Because you can't kill a man with lies forever. Sooner or later, the truth digs its way out, and I was already clawing. After Miller's confession, I started keeping a notebook. Not the small one from my mechanic days. This was a prison ledger, pages torn from cafeteria supply forms. I wrote everything I remembered, every date, every name, every detail of that night at the gas station, every lie told in court. I wrote it for Grace, for the day she'd find out I hadn't died. Sister Agnes caught me once writing after lights out. "Still hoping, Samuel?" she asked. I looked up, my pen shaking. "If I stop, I disappear," she smiled sadly. "Then don't stop." Years blurred. Men came and went. Ralph died in his sleep one winter morning. Heart failure. I folded his crooked cat drawing into my notebook and whispered, "You got out first." "Buddy." The walls felt emptier after that. But one day, out of nowhere, Hope walked back into my life wearing a suit and a tired smile. His name was Harold Finch, the same man who'd been just a clerk during my trial decades earlier. "I read your file," he said. "Something doesn't add up." Those words hit me harder than any punch I'd taken in prison. "What are you saying?" I whispered. "I'm saying someone buried evidence. I think you've been waiting 30 years for the wrong reason." The room spun. I gripped the edge of the table. I could barely speak. For the first time in decades, someone believed me. The walls still stood. The bars still glinted. But suddenly they didn't look eternal anymore. Somewhere, deep inside, a small voice whispered, "Maybe mine. Maybe Grace's. Keep writing, Dad." And for the first time in years, I smiled. There's a sound that haunts every man in prison, the turn of a calendar page. That soft whisper of paper tearing, the quiet proof that another month has died. I used to count time by letters that never came. But when those stopped, I counted by calendars. 30 years. That's not time. That's erosion. You don't live years in a cell. You dissolve in them. You stop being who you were and start being what they've left of you. My hair went white before my 60th birthday. My hands, once steady enough to rebuild an engine blindfolded, started trembling when I held a pencil. The guards changed, the rules changed, even the uniforms changed colors, but the walls stayed the same. The walls remembered. I worked in the laundry for 2 decades. The steam burned the skin off my fingers so many times I stopped feeling it. Every towel I folded was like a prayer to no one. Some days, I'd look at the sun through the narrow slit of a window and imagine it was the same one shining over Grace. Maybe she'd have children by now. Maybe she'd look at them and tell stories about a father she lost too soon. The world outside turned into a rumor. Cell phones, the internet, presidents coming and going. Men would talk about it like it was science fiction. For me, it was just noise from another planet. But then Harold Finch kept visiting. He wasn't just digging through paperwork. He was digging through my grave. "There's something here," he'd say. A report that vanished, a witness statement that was changed. Each time he came, he looked older, more determined. "Don't give up on me," he told me once, gripping my shoulder through the bars. "I gave up 30 years ago," I said. He smiled sadly. "Then let me believe for you." For the first time in decades, I let someone carry a piece of my hope. It was heavier than I remembered, and somewhere deep inside, under all the rust and years, a part of me started to breathe again. It was raining the night Harold came with the paper that changed everything. The guards made him wait an hour before letting him in, and by the time he sat across from me, his suit was soaked through. But his hands were shaking, but not from the cold, from excitement. "I found it," he whispered. "Found what?" He slid a thin folder across the table. The label was smeared, but I could read it. Evidence case number 48765, 1986. Inside was a report signed by Officer Frank Dugan, the same man who arrested me. But the signature wasn't the only thing there. Attached was a second page, a witness statement from a man named Elliot Crane. He was at the gas station the night of the murder, Harold said. He told police he saw two men. Neither of them matched your description. The report was never submitted to your defense. It was buried. I stared at the paper until the words blurred. 30 years. 30 years stolen because one man decided the truth wasn't convenient. Harold leaned forward. We can use this. It's enough to reopen your case, I laughed. A raw, broken sound. You think anyone still cares, Harold? They buried me alive and called it justice. He met my eyes. Then let's make them dig you up. That night after he left, I sat on my bunk and held that paper like it was a newborn child. For decades I had nothing, no proof, no voice, no belief. Now I had a single fragile page, and I knew the system would fight to keep it buried, because the truth might set you free, but it destroys everything that depends on the lie. The months that followed were the cruelest kind of waiting. Harold filed motion after motion. The state ignored him, delayed hearings, claimed lost evidence, every trick in the book. The other inmates watched me differently. You really think they'll let you walk? One asked. You're the perfect story, the man who deserved it. I didn't answer. I'd stopped talking about freedom long ago. But every night, I'd pull out that page, smoothing its creases like a prayer. Sister Agnes was the only one who saw the fear behind my hope. It's strange, I told her once. I thought hope would make me stronger. But now it just hurts, she nodded. Because now you can imagine what they took from you. And she was right. Hope wasn't a light. It was a wound reopening. Every time Harold called saying we're close, I'd feel the air leave my lungs, because close isn't the same as free. Then one morning the warden called me to his office. He didn't look me in the eye. Your case is under review, he said. State court ordered new hearings. I stood there, frozen. My knees felt weak. For 38 years I'd been a ghost. Now suddenly the world wanted to know if the ghost had been real all along. That night I didn't sleep. I watched the first light creep through the window. That same thin beam that had mocked me for decades, only this time it didn't feel like mockery. It felt like a whisper. It said, "Get ready." They called me to the interview room at noon. The air inside was thick with the smell of old coffee and dust, and when I saw Harold sitting there in a dark grey suit, I knew something had changed. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days but was too wired to care. He slid a single sheet of paper across the table, a court order stamped in blue ink. I didn't touch it at first. I'd learned that hope could burn just as bad as fire. It's official, Harold said, voice trembling. The appellate court granted a hearing. You're going back before a judge. My throat locked. You mean they have to re-examine the case, Samuel? The witness report, the chain of evidence, everything. It's a start, a start. The two words that every prisoner learns to hate and crave at the same time. I stared at that paper, the blue seal glinting like a small piece of the sky. My hands shook as I reached for it. I hadn't touched anything that free in 38 years. When I looked up, Harold was watching me, eyes wet, smile tight. You always said no one would believe you. Well, I do. And now finally someone else has to listen. That night back in my cell I couldn't sleep. The other inmates were quiet, but the walls buzzed with rumors. Someone whispered, "Ward's getting out." I didn't correct them. I didn't want to jinx it. I just sat there staring at the paper on my lap, the ink faint in the dim light. For the first time in my life, I didn't want to dream. I wanted to stay awake, to watch every second of the night pass. Proof that time was still moving forward for me, not looping in circles anymore. Hope was back, fragile, dangerous, but alive, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to meet it again. The courthouse looked smaller than I remembered. The same cracked steps, the same dusty flags. But walking through those doors again, without chains this time, felt unreal. I could feel every eye on me. Some faces looked away. Others stared like they'd seen a ghost walk in from the newspaper archives. Judge Hale was long gone, retired or dead, I didn't ask. The new judge, Evelyn Grant, read the file with a frown that said she'd seen too many mistakes in her career to be surprised by another. The prosecutor tried to sound confident, but the cracks showed. The missing witness statement, the altered fingerprint report, the chain of custody that didn't match up, and it all came spilling out. Harold spoke with calm fury, every word sharp as a blade. When they brought in Elliot Crane, the forgotten witness, he looked like a man carrying a 40-year secret on his back. That night, he said softly, I saw two men. Neither was him. He pointed at me. I told Officer Dugan, but he said I must have been mistaken. He said not to repeat it. The courtroom went silent. You could hear the reporters' pens scratching like insects. The judge asked, "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" He looked down. "Because I was scared, and because nobody asked." Those words hit me harder than anything else, and because nobody asked after all these years, that was the truth. Nobody asked. Nobody wanted to. Harold placed a hand on my shoulder. "It's over," he whispered. But it wasn't, not yet. The state requested time for review. The hearing ended without a verdict. I walked out under a sky that felt too wide, too blue, too undeserved. The wind carried the smell of rain. And for the first time since 1986, it didn't smell like prison. It smelled like the world. Weeks later, I was folding laundry in the workroom when the loudspeaker crackled. "Inmate Wardies, report to administration." The room went silent. Even the machines stopped sounding real. I walked the long hallway, each step louder than the last. When I reached the office, Warden Charles Benton was waiting, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Beside him stood Harold, holding a manila envelope. The warden cleared his throat. "The court has ruled. You've been exonerated, Mr. Ward." The words didn't land right. My ears rang. "Exonerated," I repeated, like it was a language I'd forgotten. Harold grinned. "You're going home, Samuel. Home." The word nearly broke me. They led me to a small room, handed me the same denim jacket they'd taken 38 years ago. It was faded, torn at the cuffs, but it still had my name stitched inside. I put it on and it hung loose, the way memories do when you've grown smaller inside them. When the gate opened, the sound was different than I'd imagined. Not a dramatic clang, but a soft metallic sigh. The kind of sound a cage makes when it finally gets tired of keeping you. Outside, the sun was blinding. I lifted my hand to shield my eyes and felt tears sting the corners. Freedom didn't feel like flying. It felt like standing still after running for decades. It felt like disbelief wrapped in sunlight. I turned to Harold, voice trembling. "What now?" he smiled. "Now you start living again." But as the wind moved through the trees, I realized, I didn't know how, not anymore. The first thing I noticed outside wasn't the sun, it was the sound. The world was loud. Cars, music, people shouting into little glowing rectangles. Everything moved too fast, too bright, too careless. The air even smelled different, cleaner, sharper. But I couldn't tell if it was better, or if I'd just forgotten what freedom really tasted like. Harold drove me to a halfway house on the edge of Columbus, Ohio. I stared out the window the whole time, watching fields turn into concrete, wondering how many of those miles I'd already walked in my head. He said the state would issue a small compensation, money for the years I lost. "It's not much," he said quietly, "but it's something." Money, that word didn't mean the same anymore. I'd traded decades for it. What could it possibly buy me back? At the halfway house, they gave me a cot, a key card, and a room that smelled like bleach and plastic. The counselor, Mara, smiled too wide. "You'll adjust," she said. "They all do." But I wasn't sure who they were, the other men who got out after half a lifetime or the ghosts who followed them. That night, I sat by the window watching the streetlights flicker. A bus passed by, filled with faces I didn't know, going somewhere that didn't need me. I thought about Grace. I'd seen her name once online, years ago in a newspaper mention. Grace Ward, local artist, daughter of the late Samuel Ward. My death had made her real to the world. My life might only confuse it. Still, I whispered her name into the night. Grace. The syllable felt like a prayer. I wasn't sure I had the right to say anymore. Outside, a train wailed in the distance, that long aching sound that used to lull me to sleep as a boy. But now, it just sounded like time leaving without me. The next few weeks were strange rehearsals for a life that didn't fit. Harold helped me get an ID, open a bank account, sign forms that felt like reading someone else's history. Everywhere I went, people stared, not because they recognized me, but because I walked wrong, talked slower, blinked too much at screens. "Everything's online now," Mara said, handing me a phone. "You'll get used to it." I turned the device over in my hand. "Used to what?" "To living," she said. But her smile didn't reach her eyes. I tried to find work, but no one wanted to hire a man who'd spent nearly 4 decades in a cage. "Background check," they said. Even though the record was cleared, the stain remained. I ended up volunteering at a mechanic shop, cleaning tools I once knew better than my own hands. Sometimes customers would bring in cars that smelled like the world I missed: gasoline, wet leaves, cheap coffee. Those smells anchored me. They were proof I hadn't imagined who I'd been, but the nights were harder. I'd wake up every few hours, certain that a guard was about to count heads. I'd hear keys in my dreams. One night, Mara found me sitting in the hallway shaking. She brought me a cup of tea and said softly, "It's okay to grieve what you lost." I looked at her and said, "I'm not grieving time. I'm grieving me." She didn't answer. Just sat beside me until dawn. The world outside had moved on fast and merciless, but I was still stuck somewhere between a cell and a sunrise, trying to remember how to be someone who could stand in the light without feeling like an intruder. It happened on a Sunday afternoon. I was fixing the loose door on the halfway house pantry when I heard it. 3 knocks, not loud, not urgent, just hesitant. When I opened the door, I froze. A young woman stood there, maybe in her early 40s. Her hair was dark like Linda's, but her eyes, God, those eyes, that they were mine. "Mr. Ward?" she asked, voice unsure. "Samuel Ward." I couldn't breathe. "Yes," I managed. She looked at the ground, then back at me. I'm Grace." The world tilted. My legs nearly gave out. For a second I thought I was dreaming again, another cruel trick of memory. But then she stepped closer, and I saw it, the little scar above her left eyebrow. The same one she'd gotten as a child falling off her bike. I'd kissed that bruise once. I wanted to hug her, to fall to my knees, to say her name 100 times until it stopped hurting, but she didn't move. Her expression was cold, almost clinical. "I came because—" "Mom's gone," she said. "Cancer." She swallowed hard. "And I heard you got a settlement." "I just thought—" Her voice cracked. "You thought what?" I asked gently. She met my eyes for the first time. "I thought maybe you could help me." That's when I realized she hadn't come for forgiveness. She'd come for money. And just like that, the world that had opened up for me started closing again. She stood in the doorway, that strange mixture of stranger and memory. Her hair was longer than Linda's ever was, a little unkempt, like she'd run her fingers through it 100 times before knocking. There were lines around her eyes that didn't belong to the little girl I remembered. But the way she bit her lip when she hesitated, that was Grace, my Grace. "I didn't think you'd answer," she said. "I didn't think you'd ever knock," I replied. My voice cracked like an old hinge. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, her eyes scanning the small, bare room. The smell of old wood and cheap detergent clung to the air. "So this is where you live?" "For now." She nodded slowly, arms crossed, gaze flicking toward the floor. "They said you got money for what they did to you." I could hear the bitterness in her tone, though I couldn't tell who it was meant for, me, the state, or the ghost of her mother. "Yes," I said quietly. "A little." Her eyes sharpened. "How much?" I smiled, but it wasn't joy. "You came all this way after 38 years to ask that?" She flinched. "Don't make it sound ugly." "I don't have to," I said. "It already is." Silence. Then in a softer voice she said, "Mom was sick. For a long time. Hospital bills, debt." She trailed off, then met my eyes. "I'm not here because I want to be." That hurt worse than anything. I wanted to tell her I'd spent nearly 4 decades dreaming of her knock on my door, that I'd imagined 1,000 versions of this reunion, none of them like this, but instead I just nodded. "I'll help you," I said. "But you have to listen to me first." "Listen to what?" "To the truth," I said. And for the first time since she arrived, she looked afraid. We sat across from each other at the small kitchen table. The air between us felt thick, haunted. Every time Grace crossed her arms, every time she frowned, I saw Linda's ghost flicker through her movements. "I don't want to talk about her," Grace said, staring out the window. "But she's the reason you're here," I said gently. She always was. She turned to me sharply. "You don't get to talk about her like that. She raised me alone. She worked 2 jobs. She lied," I interrupted. Grace froze. Her jaw tightened. "Don't. She told you I was dead." Grace blinked fast, confusion flickering across her face. "She told me you died in prison, pneumonia. She told the state that too. I found out from a guard. She had me buried on paper so you'd never come looking." Grace's breath caught. She looked away. "Why would she do that?" "Because she needed to believe the lie she told," I said. "If she admitted I was innocent, Then she'd have to admit what she'd done, how she walked away when I needed her most. Grace shook her head, whispering, "No, Mum wouldn't." "She would," I said softly. "She did." I reached into the drawer beside me and pulled out one of the old letters, creased and yellowed. "I wrote to you every year." She sent them back. Grace stared at the envelope like it might burn her fingers. "I never saw these." "I know," I said, "but they're yours now." She didn't touch it, just stared, and in that silence I could feel her world cracking, the way mine had all those years ago when the gavel fell. "Why are you telling me this?" she whispered finally. "Because lies die slower than people do," I said, "and I'm tired of letting her ghost live rent-free in both our heads." Grace stood and paced, her hand trembling. "You expect me to believe all this? That my mother lied about everything?" "I don't expect anything," I said. "I just want you to see the truth for yourself." She turned on me, eyes wet but fierce. "You weren't there, Dad. You don't know what it was like." She cried every night. "She said you left us. She said you were dangerous." I swallowed hard. She was right about one thing. I did leave, but not by choice. I opened the notebook I'd kept in prison, pages filled with names, dates, the story she'd never heard. "Read it, every page, then decide what's true." She hesitated, then took it with shaking hands. She sat again, flipping through the first few pages. Her lips moved silently as she read my handwriting, the uneven lines written in the dim light of a cell. Minutes passed, maybe hours. I didn't move. Finally, she whispered, "They framed you." "Yes, and Mom knew." "She suspected," I said, "but she chose peace over truth." Her hand covered her mouth. Her body trembled. "Why didn't you come find me sooner?" she asked. "Because you thought I was dead," I said softly. "And when a man's buried that deep, even his ghosts have to dig their way out." Tears rolled down her cheeks. She closed the notebook and looked at me. Not like a stranger, not like a daughter, but like someone standing between two worlds and realizing both were broken. "I don't know what to believe," she whispered. "Start with this," I said. "Believe I never stopped loving you." Her eyes met mine, and for a flicker of a second I saw the child she used to be. Then she looked away, clutching the notebook like a wound. Outside, thunder rolled over the city, the same sound that had echoed the day they took me, only this time, it wasn't fear I felt. It was the sound of something breaking open. Grace came back the next day. I hadn't expected her to. She stood at my door with the same notebook clutched to her chest, her eyes red-rimmed, her voice flat. "I read it," she said. I nodded, stepping aside. "And?" She walked in, silent at first, then sat at the table where Linda's ghost still seemed to linger. The same chair, the same quiet. "I didn't sleep," she whispered. Every word in that notebook felt like something I should have known already. But I didn't, because she made sure I didn't. Her fingers tightened on the notebook. "When I was little, she used to tell me bedtime stories about you. About how you ran away. About how you chose money over us. She said you were dangerous, that she'd kept me safe." I sat across from her, my voice barely above a breath. "And you believed her." "I had to," she said. "She was all I had." Her voice cracked. And suddenly she wasn't 40 anymore. She was the little girl behind the glass in that visitation room, the one I'd tried to wave to before they dragged me away. "She told me you never wrote," she said, "that you didn't want me, that you'd forgotten." I reached for the small box I'd kept all those years, filled with returned letters, folded carefully like fragile bones. "I never stopped writing, Grace. I just didn't know she'd built a wall around you tall enough to block even paper." She looked at the stack, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Why would she do that?" "Because she was afraid," I said softly. "Afraid of shame. Afraid you'd learn she'd left an innocent man behind." Grace buried her face in her hands. "She said she protected me, but all she did was keep me blind." Her sobs filled the room. I didn't move to hold her. I just let her cry, because this was a kind of grieving too. Not for her mother, but for the truth that had come too late. Outside, rain started again, the steady kind that makes everything sound like memory. And for the first time, I didn't hate the sound. A few days later, Grace came again. This time she brought a box of her mother's things. "I didn't know what to do with them," she said. "But maybe you should." Inside were fragments of a life that wasn't mine anymore. Linda's wedding ring, faded photos, bills, receipts, a few old newspaper clippings about my case. Had at the bottom, sealed in a yellow envelope, a stack of letters. They were mine, unopened. I felt my stomach twist. Grace's voice trembled. "I found them in a drawer. She kept them, Dad. She didn't throw them away." My hands shook as I lifted one, dated December 1994, my handwriting shaky but alive. "Dear Grace, I dreamed you were learning to ride your bike today." Grace covered her mouth as she watched me. "She read them, didn't she?" "I think she did," I said, my voice cracking. "And I think she couldn't stand what they reminded her of." Grace nodded slowly, as if the pieces were falling into place one by one. "She was sick for a long time," she whispered. "She said she wanted to tell me something before she died, but she couldn't find the words. I thought she meant about the cancer. She meant me," I said quietly. Grace's tears came again, quieter this time, softer. "She lied because she thought she was protecting me, but she didn't realize she was killing both of us. I wanted to hate Linda, I really did. But looking at my daughter, at the woman shaped by those lies, I couldn't, because Linda's fear was the same fear I'd lived with, the fear of being forgotten." I folded one of the letters and handed it to Grace. "Read this one out loud," I said. She hesitated, then began, "I don't blame you for believing what you're told, my little light. Just promise me someday you'll ask your own questions." Her voice broke halfway through. She pressed the paper to her chest, and for the first time in almost 4 decades, my words had finally reached her. Grace stayed until evening. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. The air between us was filled with everything that should have been said years ago. When she finally spoke, her voice was different and steadier, older. "I can't forgive her. Not yet. Maybe not ever." "That's all right," I said. "Forgiveness isn't for the dead. It's for the living." She looked at me for a long moment. "I don't know you, Dad, not really." "I don't know you either," I said. "But maybe that's a start." She smiled faintly. Not joy, not peace, but something that felt like the beginning of both. "What did you do all those years?" "In there, I mean." I thought about it. I waited. I watched men lose their minds, their names. I learned how to breathe without hope. And I wrote. Every word was a way of staying human. She nodded. "I think I'm starting to understand." Before she left, she stopped at the door, the light from the hallway catching her face. "You know, I almost didn't come. I thought you'd hate me." I shook my head. "You can't hate someone you've been waiting for your whole life." She hesitated, then stepped forward and hugged me. It wasn't long or tight or perfect, but it was real. I felt her heartbeat against mine, quick, uncertain, alive. When she pulled away, there were tears in her eyes again. "I don't know what happens next," she said. "Neither do I answered. "But for the first time, I want to find out." After she left, I sat alone with Linda's letters, her ring and the sound of rain still falling outside. The lies had raised my daughter, but the truth, fragile, late, imperfect, had finally reached her. And maybe that was enough. A week passed before Grace came again. I spent those days walking, not anywhere far, just around the block, under skies that felt too wide. Freedom still didn't fit right. It was heavy in the lungs, awkward in the bones. But that week I carried something lighter, the image of my daughter reading my words for the first time. When she arrived, she was holding another envelope, thicker, sealed in cream paper, her name written across the front in Linda's handwriting. She handed it to me, her fingers trembling. "I found this yesterday," she said. It was taped to the bottom of her jewelry box. I didn't want to touch it. I was afraid of what it might take back. "Open it," Grace whispered. Inside were 3 pages, Linda's last letter. The ink had bled in places, the edges water-stained. Cancer had her long before the doctors said so, I thought. Her words came in small, broken lines. "Grace, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I lied about your father because I was afraid. I saw what the world did to him, and I couldn't bear to let it do the same to you. He was innocent, Grace. He loved you. I just couldn't face him again after what I'd done. Forgive me if you can. Tell him. Tell him I never stopped loving him." Mom, the room went silent, except for the rain against the window. Grace covered her mouth, sobbing into her palms. I read the letter again and again, the words cutting deeper each time. For so many years I'd dreamed of Linda admitting the truth. I thought it would heal something. But as I held her words, all I felt was the weight of time, all the birthdays missed, all the nights Grace cried over a lie, All the days I prayed for a miracle that came decades too late. She knew, Grace whispered. She knew what she did, I nodded. And maybe that's why she couldn't let go until now. Grace wiped her tears. I hate her. And I love her. That's what truth does, I said quietly. It breaks you in both directions. Outside, thunder rolled again, softer this time, like a heartbeat fading in the distance. We buried Linda's ashes 2 days later, just outside Marion, near the same church where we were married. The stained glass was gone, replaced with cheap panels, and the yard was overgrown. I hadn't stood on that ground since I was 25. Grace placed the urn in the earth herself. She didn't say much, just a few words under her breath that only the wind could hear. I watched her kneel, hair whipping across her face, and I saw both of us reflected in her. Two people learning how to breathe after drowning in someone else's lies. Afterward, we drove in silence. The sky was low and grey, the kind that presses on you, makes every thought louder. Finally, Grace spoke. Do you think she deserved forgiveness? I took a long breath. I think she deserved the truth. Same as me. Same as you, Grace nodded slowly. I want to hate her for what she did, but I can't stop thinking about why she did it. Maybe she really thought she was saving me. She was saving herself, I said. But she didn't understand that saving yourself at the cost of someone else's truth isn't survival. It's just another kind of death. Grace looked out the window. I don't know how to live with both versions of her. You don't, I said softly. You just let them fight inside you until one of them learns to rest. She smiled through tears. You talk like a preacher now, I laughed quietly. 38 years alone gives you time to practice sermons no one hears. We pulled over by the side of the road where the fields began, golden and endless. The air smelled of rain and cut grass. For a long time we just stood there, two people surrounded by everything we'd lost and yet somehow still standing. That night I sat by the window again. Same chair, same silence. Grace had gone back to her own home, promising to visit next week. She'd left Linda's letter on the table, folded neatly beside my old notebook. I opened the last page of that notebook and wrote my final entry. I am not angry anymore. I am not whole either, but I am here. And that's enough. Outside the world hummed, the distant sound of cars, laughter somewhere, a dog barking in the dark. I hadn't realized until then how beautiful ordinary noise could be. I thought about Linda, her laughter before fear found her, her hand in mine the day Grace was born, her last words written in shaky ink. I thought about how lies can grow roots deep enough to hold a family hostage for a lifetime, and how truth, when it finally breaks the surface, doesn't save you. It just gives you something real to carry. Grace called just before midnight. Her voice was quiet. Dad? Yes? I kept reading your letters, she said. I don't know if I'll ever understand everything, but thank you for writing them. They made me feel like I still had a father, even when I didn't. I smiled. You always did. You just had to dig deep enough to find him. We stayed on the phone for a long time without talking, just breathing, just listening. And when the call ended, I realized something strange. The silence that followed wasn't empty anymore. It was full. Full of the sound of things trying to heal, full of the ghost of a love that outlasted every lie. And when the morning light crept in through the blinds, I whispered to it. Light. The word Grace first spoke as a baby, because even after all this time, after all the darkness, the light still answered back. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.